So we begin a new month, and with a new month, we begin the study of a new archetypal pattern, and this month is the explorer, or the traveler, or the pilgrim, or the wanderer. This has to be one of my favorite archetypal patterns. Anybody else? Look at everybody, yay! So the explorer is going beyond boundaries and seeking out new adventures. When I hear that definition, I always think of Captain Kirk and Captain Picard on the Enterprise, who said its 5-year mission is to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, and to boldly go where no one has gone before. That's the explorer, right? That's the explorer right there. We have famous explorers in history, such as Amelia Earhart comes to mind, Lewis and Clark. Probably in fiction is Indiana Jones. So we get this sense of excitement, when we think about the explorer and the traveler and the wanderer. And I think this archetypal pattern is probably most contained in toddlers. Right? Because what are toddlers doing? They're exploring. They're trying to figure out where they are, how does this body work, what is this planet, and what is everything for? And so they're constantly exploring. They're constantly on the move. I remember when my son was almost 2 and I was taking him for a walk around the block, and we're just sort of walking, and then I looked down and he wasn't there, and I turned around because we were on the sidewalk, and I turned around and he'd stepped off the sidewalk onto the grass, and he was standing there looking at the grass as if he'd never seen it before. And I said, "What are you doing?" "It's grass." And I thought, oh, he doesn't really know what grass is. He's new to the planet. All these things that we take for granted, when we look through the eyes of a child and we look through the eyes of a toddler, it's like, wow, this is actually such a fascinating place, because we kind of get used to things and we don't really see with new eyes. And so being the explorer, the adventurer, the wanderer gives us that opportunity to be able to see the world with new eyes. So again, the explorer has a sense of adventure and excitement. If it has a fear or a downside, the shadow side would be a fear of getting stuck, of confined, and bored. Anybody ever feel that? So if you have a strong explorer, that can just really push you. And part of the shadow also can be aimless wandering and not fitting in. Being impulsive, moving simply for the sake of moving. And a variation of the explorer is the pilgrim, and that is someone who travels for religious or spiritual reasons. And I don't see how we can travel anywhere and not have it affect us spiritually. I don't see how that could happen. Chateaubriand, I always thought that was just a cut of meat, but Chateaubriand said, "There was never a pilgrim that did not come back to his own village with one less prejudice and one more idea." Haven't you had that experience when you've traveled? Traveling opens the mind. Amelia Earhart said that adventure is worthwhile in and of itself. And the day before she disappeared, she wrote of the glory of seeing the Pacific Ocean from both sides, and of her desire to put the whole ocean behind her. You just get this sense of just wanting to keep moving and exploring and going beyond boundaries. Now, you know that I have connected a lot of the archetypal patterns with astrological signs, and I've put Aries with explorer, though it also could be the warrior, because Aries is a typical explorer. Aries is a leader. It is the one that wants to go first. In fact, one of an Aries sayings is ready, fire, aim. That movement forward without a whole lot of thought. So the purpose of the explorer is for us to go beyond boundaries. And this takes courage, and it also takes a sense of adventure. Now, the god Hermes is the god of travelers. And in ancient times, when travelers would be traveling, they would take a stone and then put it on the ground near the village. And then another traveler would come by and put another stone until there was a whole pile of stones, and the stones marked the boundary of the town. And this pile of stones was called a herm. And a herm later became Hermes, the god of boundaries, the god of traveling. So Hermes is the boundary maker. And Murray Stein said that Hermes stood at the edge of known space, a pile of stones at the boundary, and his sign marked the limit. But it also, for our purposes, marks the limit of consciousness, right? So when we're willing to go beyond our boundaries, we're willing to go beyond where our present consciousness is. And isn't this the message that Jesus gave us when he said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. It's always expanding. So part of our spiritual practice is to be expanding the consciousness. And one of the ways we do that is through exploration and through traveling. How many travelers do we have in this room? And I know some of you are getting ready to go off on a trip. Scott's getting ready to go to Italy, and Louise is getting ready to go to Greece. Anybody else getting ready to go somewhere? Where are you going? Ireland. Shout it out.
Sweden. Louise.
Utah. Kansas. Where? Burien. Tacoma. Belize. And I know Gary and Lynn right now, they're in Vietnam. They're there with the planting trees, I believe. So we can see that it's a pretty strong archetypal pattern within this community, isn't it? That there's this real sense of wandering and traveling. I've shared with you before that I started traveling when I was 20 years old because I realized that I had never really been anywhere. I kind of grew up within the boundary of Chicago, and we didn't really take any vacations. When my mom had a week off, we would be tourists in Chicago, which was fun. You know, we'd go on the boat, and we'd go to the zoo, and we'd go to Riverview. But we never really left the city, and we almost never really left the boundaries of it. And as I was in Arizona for spring training, the only time I got out of Chicago was if the Cubs were going somewhere, and I followed them. Then I got to see, Cincinnati and St. Louis. I got to go really far. And anyway, when I realized that I had never really seen anything like an ocean, like a mountain, like a desert, I made the decision that I was going to get out of Chicago. And the truth is, I didn't care where I went. Could have been Colorado, it could have been Europe. I really didn't care. And I found a group that was traveling through North and East Africa. There were about 20 of us. We had a 10-ton truck. We camped through the Sahara and Zaire, and it was supposed to end up in Nairobi, but I got off it in Rwanda somewhere because it tipped over in a ditch. But But what I noticed that happened to me was, I think the archetypal pattern of the explorer, of the traveler, seized me. And sometimes that will happen with an archetypal pattern that we're leaning into, is that we get seized by it, and it's almost like we can't stop. For 10 years, I moved every 6 months, whether it was to a different state or whether it was traveling to another country. I couldn't stop. Now when I look at my life, I've been here in Seattle for 25 years. It's like, was I ever that archetypal pattern? But it was so strong in me, and what it did is it helped me break the Chicago bubble. Now, I love Chicago. Chicago will always be my home, but there's a certain mindset of thinking about the world that was broken for me, because particularly in those days, there were no cell phones, there was no Skype, a letter took a month to get somewhere. So you really were alone, and you really had to be pushed past your boundary. You really had to go out into a different way than we ever had before. And the other thing that I noticed, and this is the shadow side of the wanderer, of the explorer, is sometimes I would run into people who had been out on the road for years. I met one guy who had been on the road for 10 years. He was very wealthy, so he could do that. But what I noticed is people started to lose touch with reality, because what happens when you travel? The rules are different. The customs are different. Things that we take for granted here aren't there. And so the reality is constantly shifting, and sometimes we need that grounding underneath ourselves in order to maintain a sense of sanity, really. So strange things can happen to you when you're on the road, right? When you're traveling. So one of the things I remember is I was in Zaire, and most of the time we cooked our own food because we were camping out. But sometimes we'd hit a town, so we'd go out to dinner, and I thought, I'm going to expand my horizons here. So I was looking at the menu in this fancy restaurant, and it said, it was in French, I think, but it was like the fruit of the trees. And I thought, well, that sounds good, fruit of the trees. Everybody else was having a steak or this or that, and I said, I'm going to have the fruit of the trees. So I get my plate, and I got a big plate of fried bugs, the fruit of the trees. And I was like, and I couldn't do it. I wish I'd said that I could do it, but I didn't do it. No, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I starved that night. And what I also know about that trip is that after 6 months, I forced myself to go home, because I realized that I stopped having a sense of wonder at things that I saw. And I no longer wanted to like see a pyramid. I never got there, but I didn't want to go see a pyramid and go, it's a pyramid, I wanted to have that sense of wonder, which again is that coming back to your own reality and then moving out again. So here's another thing about traveling, and that is the more that one explores, the more one sees that we're all the same, that there is no difference, that God is here as much as God is there. There is no place where we can be where God is not, and that we're all the same. There is no other. There are no enemies. We are all human beings we are all divine instruments and spirits of the divine within. When I was in this island called Lamu, off of Kenya, a woman offered to teach some friends of mine and I how to cook fish. So we went to her house, and we were cooking, and her husband came home from work, and it was like 5 o'clock, and he came home, and he was wearing, like this traditional Arab dress, and he came in, and he had an easy chair in the living room, and he sat down on the easy chair, and his kids came and ran to him and sat in his lap. And I thought, you know what? I could be looking at a scene in Chicago or New York or Italy or it doesn't matter, because it's the same story over and over again. We're all one. The same things are happening no matter where we are. Again, Chateaubriand said, there was never a pilgrim that did not come back to his own village with one less prejudice and one more idea. So when Jesus was expanding his ministry, he sent his disciples out 2 by 2. And I think the reason he sent them out to teach and to heal 2 by 2 is because when there's 2 of them, they can maintain their reality together, right? They can maintain, why are we here and what are we doing together? They can hold that for each other. But an interesting thing, in the book of Matthew, it says, he told them, take no gold, nor silver, nor copper in your belts, no bag for your journey, nor 2 tunics, nor sandals, nor a staff, for the laborer deserves his food. So he's sending the disciples out. Yeah, he's sending them out 2 by 2, but they can't take any money. They can't take their shoes. They can't take extra tunic. They can't take any extras. And why do you suppose that is? Trust. Yeah. I think he did it because he wanted them to rely on God. And when they have an extra tunic, yeah, who cares? I got my extra tunic. I got money, I can go stay in a hotel. But when you take away all the extras, then stepping into a new town or a new reality, one is needing to be really aware of what's going on around you, right, at all times, in order to be open to magic, in order to be open to synchronicities and to recognizing that there is only God and leaning on that. So I had a mini experience of that again when the truck tipped over in a ditch in Rwanda. No, actually it was Tanzania. I got off, not with the intention of getting off, but to see some friends off on a ferry, and I just got on the ferry. I thought, the truck will show up in Nairobi eventually, so I'll be able to get my stuff then. But I ended up traveling for 2 or 3 weeks with basically what I had on and my journal and my passport. I think I had $5. And I traveled that way it was kind of interesting trying to get into another country when you only have $5. I remember going, so what do you got? I have $5. You can't come into our country with $5. I said, why not? I have $5. I'll figure it out. Anyway, what I noticed was that I had to be really awake, aware, and dependent on God. And I was. I had this running conversation going with God all the time, and I felt like I was always in the right place. I was always with the right people. I was always provided for, and things just always lined up in a synchronistic way that happened for me, and it's never happened that way since. And I really believe it's because I let go of everything that I had and was willing to just be present in the moment, to be present to that magical place. So that's why I think that he told the disciples to do that. So Scott, don't take a suitcase or when you're in Italy, just go. And so for the disciples, it became a pilgrimage. So there are also planned pilgrimages. There's lots of them in this world. There's Machu Picchu would be considered a pilgrimage, wouldn't it? The Pilgrim's Path in England, Mecca, traveling to Mecca is a pilgrimage, and the Camino de Santiago. I think that any trip with the right attitude can be a pilgrimage. And the thing about a pilgrimage, though, like the Camino or the Machu Picchu or whatever it may be, is that everybody's going with a similar purpose. I've shared before that the trip on the Camino, everybody's walking in the same direction, and there are little yellow arrows painted all over Spain to guide you, so you don't have to think about where you're going. You get up in the morning, you look on the ground, you see if you can find an arrow, and then you follow it. And you follow it from town to town, all the way across Europe, and even the statues are pointing in the direction that you need to go. And the sense of it is that God is looking out for you, that God is looking out for you. It's like these arrows are pointing the way on this pilgrimage. And what I noticed when I was on the Camino is that everybody was walking, not everybody, but most people were walking for a reason. One woman survived cancer, and so she walked the Camino in celebration of that. Many people were grieving different things, and so they were walking that. And what was interesting is that you had to walk at your own pace. You could match somebody for a couple of hours, maybe even a day, but you couldn't do it day after day. You must listen to yourself and walk at your own pace. So it became a pilgrimage then of knowing oneself. So the explorer not only goes beyond the boundaries, both physical and mental and in consciousness, but as the explorer goes beyond the boundaries get smaller in some ways, don't they? So the farther out we go, the more connected we all become. The more we recognize that we are one and that the world is actually a very small place because we're willing to go beyond the boundaries. So there is nowhere we can be where God is not. The sense of the explorer is to expand the horizons, to go beyond where we are, to follow the footsteps of Jesus when he said, "The kingdom of heaven is in the midst of you." It is our purpose in being here is to expand in all the many different ways that we can, whether we're staying here in Seattle or whether we're going halfway around the world. So my prayer for us is that we may always have the opportunity to be pilgrims, that we may always have the opportunity to go beyond not only our own boundaries that we have in our mind, but that we go beyond the boundaries of separation and limitation and connect and recognize that we are one and that there is nowhere we can be where God is not. Happy travels. Oh, good. They turned out the light.